everyone. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure to be at YPO Edge, and such a pleasure to be hosting this event, of course, with Orit Gadiesh from Bain & Company. My guest today needs no introduction. She's going to talk about operating in the unfamiliar. Orit Gadiesh is the chairman of Bain & Company. When the world's top corporate leaders face tough strategic decisions and challenges, they turn to her. She's widely recognized for her expertise in implementation of change within a corporation. Her pet phrase, true north, is something she picked up from her husband, an avid sailor, a powerful metaphor she uses for sticking to core values. Now, she saw Bain through its near bankruptcy, and during that process acted as a mediator between the company and its founders. Everyone remembers her for her great speech, most importantly, the one she made during the crisis, in a company in which she received a thunderous ovation soon after she was appointed chairman, the only woman to have led a big consultancy firm. Born in Israel, served in the army there, she's listed by Forbes as one of the most powerful women in the world. Orit, thank you so much for being with me here at YPO Edge. So good to talk to you. Now, you've talked to hundreds of CEOs. Can I get a show of hands? How many of you have actually talked to Orit personally?
Nobody.
Plenty of networking around today then. Okay guys, this is your opportunity to talk to her after this. She's a wealth of information. Now Orit, let me start off by talking about operating in the unfamiliar. What are some of the key changes in the global economy that you're noticing today that business leaders in this crowd should worry about?
Let me talk about one of the things that are referred to but probably not discussed enough in terms of a major disruption that is likely to occur and affect everybody here. And that is the coming together of the aging of populations, particularly in the OECD, but China is also correct. The automation of jobs, and I'll touch on that, and rising inequality even beyond what it is now. And that is going to cause a major disruption of the kind we actually haven't seen for a while. What we're used to is GDP going up, productivity going up, and prosperity going up, measured in GDP per capita. And given, I don't think I need to talk about the aging population, everybody knows pretty much the statistics, but the speed and the sheer volume of automation that is coming on is actually going to hit various sectors in a way that we haven't seen before without really having time to catch up to changes in jobs, and therefore leaving, on one hand, a lot of jobs unfulfilled, and I'll touch on that in a moment, and yet a lot of people probably unemployed, which will, as you can imagine, given the changes in income that are going to occur, will also cause rising inequality. And one of the things that is likely to happen is, as automation comes, it is already replacing a lot of the quote-unquote lower levels of income jobs. We see that quite a bit. It's expected to really eat quite a bit into mid-level jobs. And what we're going to probably find out, it's not forever, but in a decade or so, is that the mid-level is not going to be able to skill up fast enough and will compete actually with the lower level jobs, whereas the top level will be in great demand and incomes are going to rise. Organization will have to think about how to not only recruit and retain those people. And for the first time for a while, with the aging population and with this kind of changes occurring, we will not be able to account for increasing prosperity for everybody, including the aging population. And that's going to be a major change, which has implications that everybody in here will have to think about and we can talk about.
So you're talking about this great imbalance in the workplace because of automation, because of technology. How would you suggest this crowd, the business leaders, the CEOs, how would you suggest they handle this big rift that's happening in the workplace?
Well, let me start from a broader point of view and then come to a little more specifics. There are two things that, if you think about what I just said, you'll immediately have to start thinking about. One is, how do you attract the kind of talent that you will need for your companies? It will be great competition for the people that I talked about. And then in that along those same lines, how do you think about reskilling people who are in your organization? And as a member of society, there is a bigger question out there, because it's going to be not only business, it's going to be governments, it's going to be education, it's going to be society at large. Along with it comes the issue of markets are going to change. So if you think about a top tier with greater disparity from a lower tier, we're used to thinking about a market that falls into three categories: top tier, medium tier, and lower tier. And the disparity will actually cause probably about 20% to be in the top tier and about 80% to be in what we would characterize as lower tier. That has implications to how you go to market, how you think, especially your B2C, but also B2B, how you go to market and how you build the entire value chain. Beyond that, automation brings a lot of interesting things that are not that intuitive. So it used to be that you thought about scale versus customer intimacy. You did one or you did the other pretty well and you can compete. Today it's not either or, it's both. And if you think, to take just a very quick intuitive example, Amazon has got scale, actually several times over scale. It's got the platform scale, it's got scale from its size, but it has a very intimate involvement with the customers. It can predict ahead of time, it can anticipate what you're going to want. It can match demand and supply everywhere, even on a global basis. The whole way you're going to compete is going to be different. And then scale, of course.
The thinking has to change. The
thinking has to change. On the other hand, scale can be bought many times. The cloud, the apps, and so on and so forth, social media. So that thinking will have to change. One other thing that will change is CEOs are used to thinking about managing their assets they control. Well, it's going to be an ecosystem. You're going to have to rely on your suppliers, on your customers for data, for management. There are things that you do today that you won't be wanting to do because somebody else will do it more efficiently. On the other hand, you'll have to partner with a lot more people and with a diverse set of people. So you're going to be thinking about a portfolio of assets in terms of physical assets, portfolio of people in your organization, and portfolio of skills.
Let's talk more about that, because technology in another form is this great big disruption we're seeing in the workplace. And I know many of you have seen that. A lot of startups are happening, disrupting traditional business models. CEOs today, what do they need to be mindful of when trying to build up their competitive edge?
Well, going back to talent, it's not only things that I mentioned before, but also the talent pool out there today wants somewhat different things than historically people wanted. It is not so much how do I rise up in the hierarchy, but how do I find a meaningful job? How do I find a job that has a lot of positive social implications, all of which are very real and which increasingly are creeping into it. Anybody who read Larry Fink's letter will know that this is very real. But also the way you manage people. You will have, and you increasingly see that, and companies, especially startups, have more and more. You have sort of mission control sensitive areas where people team up as a group to do whatever is really required pretty fast and pretty agile way. And then the organization around it that is really geared up to support it. And if you think about managing that, it's a little more like managing a professional service firm where people come together in a group for a mission, achieve the mission, or move on to another one and disband as a group and then come together as another group. So there are some subtleties to what all of this means in terms of how you manage day to day. And I think people have to start thinking about managing companies not so much in the hierarchical and the silos ways that we're used to, but part of it will feel like managing a big startup, and part of it will feel like managing lots of different startups, and part of it will feel like managing a professional service firm, and how you bring all those things together, and as I said before, also partnering with a lot of different people require a different skill. You have to be much more inspirational, much more thoughtful about the different people that you're going to have there, and culture is going to become extremely important.
Okay. At this point, I know you have questions for Orit. Please go into your phone. There's a mobile app in there, and there's a polling function which you can ask a couple of questions. I hopefully will get to some of them if we have time. But moving on to this interesting topic where you say people have to manage different parts of business. There's this thing you've coined yourself called the expert generalist. Now, this is Orit's whole term and phrase that she uses. Tell this crowd, this audience here, why it is important for them to be an expert generalist, and what exactly are the skills involved in being an expert generalist?
Well, not everybody has to be an expert generalist, but let me describe first what it is. We're used to thinking about jobs as being more and more broad. You need to learn more, skill more, and so people become very specialized in many cases. You don't just study law, you study this aspect of that aspect of law, etc. But with deep specialization, which is needed, it comes some issue, because you need the broader context. And what expert generalist really is, which is, I guess, a cute way of trying to think about that, is really the idea that, yes, you should become a specialist in whatever area you need to be, but you should also make sure that you don't lose the ability to understand broadly what's going around you, to understand different domains, to understand different functions, to understand geopolitics, to understand how people operate in different countries, whatever it is.
Is there such a CEO that exists?
Yes, I met some of them.
to know everything? Do you guys claim to know everything?
No, you don't need to know everything. What you need to know is enough of what's out there so you can recognize patterns and connect dots, which you might not be able to when you just think about the specialty you're in, and if something happens that has never happened before. So being aware of the context and of things that have happened and are happening in other domains is extremely helpful to come back into your own expertise and actually think out of the box. Thinking out of the box is not about being smart. It is about recognizing patterns. And that is one of the things that allows you to do that. By the way, companies are thinking about it. So many people will say that Steve Jobs was actually one of those people. He wasn't an expert necessarily in technology or an expert in art. He brought all those interests together to create, to help create, or to envision the beautiful products that they created. Today, Tim Cook is walking around talking about the company as, in its sense, being expert generalist. He will say that it's not enough to bring engineers and software writers, but you need people who understand music and understand art. And without that, and I'm quoting him, you couldn't create the beautiful products that Apple is creating. So in a company context and in a personal context, it is a very helpful thing.
So it's okay to be specializing in engineering. It's okay to be
Absolutely.
specializing in accounting. It's okay to be a lawyer for you lawyers
You
out
have
there.
to specialize
It's
in
okay.
something.
But you need to broaden your scope to know, to widen your
For
insights.
CEOs, it will
connect
be
the
very
dots,
useful, yes.
like you say.
Yes.
Okay. So does this require us to think of education in a different way then?
Well, education is an issue that everybody in this room should be thinking about, because education will have to change. People are talking about it, but there's very little that has been done. If you think about what I said before about automation and the speed by which it's going to replace jobs. So people estimate about 40% of the jobs that will exist 10 years from now, we don't even know what they are. On the other hand, about 80% of all jobs that exist today will be touched by automation, will be changed. And estimates go between 25 to 35% of the jobs that exist today probably won't exist. There will be new jobs. If you think about our education system, it's by and large geared towards educating you for a job. And really what we're going to have to do is a couple of things. First, educate people for skills, and skills will change. So people will have to learn new skills. That would be a responsibility of you as a person to want to do that, but it will be a responsibility of companies to make sure that their workforce is reskilled. It will be a responsibility of governments. It will be a responsibility of education. MIT just launched a big initiative around that. And the more people actually gear up as opposed to just talking about it,
Yeah.
the faster that change will occur and the faster we'll get over the hump that I talked about
It's
before.
like a chain reaction. You want to get that going within the company.
It will be a must because there will be people who are left behind if they don't reskill. It already is happening. It has always been happening. The Rust Belt in the United States is a good example of that. We can't have 80% of the population be in that position. Obviously, that's going to be awful.
Okay. At this point in time, please keep those questions coming. I need to tell the organizers of YPO I'm having trouble with my iPad. If someone could help me, because I can't access those questions. If someone could come along from behind stage to help me do that. But let me ask you about this critical group of customers that we're talking about these days. Increasingly, a lot of the CEOs today, a lot of the CEOs here, are dealing with a new group of customers. We're talking about the millennials. They have a different way of thinking, a different way of working, a different way of living life as well. Any insights you can share on how to tackle this consumer segment, this growing consumer segment?
Well, that growing consumer segment is also your growing workforce, and probably quite a number of those are sitting here in the audience, and so they're also the growing CEO
Let's
cohort.
get a show of hands. How many of you are millennials?
That's a hell of a lot more people than ever heard of me.
Millennials?
Yeah,
Come on,
there are
don't be
quite a number
shy.
of people.
It's good to be young. I would put up my hand too, but I can't. So,
Well, then those people already are thinking about how to reorganize their markets along the lines I've talked about before. But there are all those trends that people talk about. There are a trend towards thinking more about social issues. There are trends towards sharing more rather than owning more. For each category of business that you're in, there will be distinct things that you will be thinking about. I assume that millennials will own less cars. Right now, they're still buying cars and actually beginning to buy mortgages, to buy houses and mortgage it. So some things will actually be not that different from the things that we see today as people just age, and with it comes responsibilities that people didn't have before. But like in every generation will project itself differently. In the workforce, as you think about your own talent, how to recruit it and retain it, I mentioned that before. When you think about your customers, the consumer today, not just millennials, has a lot more power than customers ever had before. They're a lot closer to what they want. As I said before, you can anticipate what they want, and they're getting used to that. I'm getting used to that. It's very easy to shop that way. All those things, I think, have been discussed a lot. The key is to actually take that into account and make some important changes.
okay, I'm going to ask a very interesting question. Do millennials here care how much they're getting paid?
Do you care how much you get paid?
Or do you work for the greater good?
Well, you do both.
Yeah.
You do both, and which is fine. You do care how much you get paid. At least that's what I see in the businesses that I either consult to or I'm part of. But you also do care about a lot of things that people didn't really talk about that much. But then Larry Fink, he's not a millennial, and he just sent his letter to the shareholders, and he talked about the need to change the way you manage. And he has 5 or 6 criteria, and profitability now is one of them. Shareholder value is just one of them. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that was not the way people talked or the way people behaved.
Okay.
And the millennials have a lot to do with it, by the way.
And speaking of shareholder value, there is a question from the floor for you, Orit. Do you think growth as in the bottom line is still the ultimate objective? Do you think growth as in the bottom line is still the ultimate objective for companies?
Growth as in the bottom line used to be put up as the ultimate objectives, but if your workforce left, you didn't have a company either. So we're exaggerating a little bit to make a point. As I just mentioned, it's now become one of many objectives. The shareholder value was epitomized by, I don't know if there's anybody from GE here, but the period where Jack Welch was CEO of GE. That was really the period where everybody talked about shareholder value, and to the extent they talked about one thing, that was always the one thing that was talked about. And indeed, during his tenure, GE's stock value went up about 40 times. Today, that's not the only thing you talk about, and it's not the only thing you can talk about. All the reasons that I talked about before, but also the ideas that come up go like wildfire in social media, for example. You say something in one place, and the next day in the other part of the world, everybody's talking about it. So the attention to social issues, the attention to climate change, which is very real for everybody who sits in this audience, you will have to deal with issues that come out of that. The attention to inequality is very real. The attention to diversity, which I know was discussed before, is very, very real. Not only because it's important that you do good things in the world and have a more diverse group, it's important because it's a competitive edge to have a diverse group and learn to get all those inputs from diverse groups. You're going to come up with a better product. You're going to be a hell of a lot better than you are without that diversity.
And there's also a creativity question for you as well. Different industry convergence is the norm, but convention system really kills innovation. Is a breakout team the only way to implement things?
A breakout team? Is that
a
what you said?
breakout team.
No, that's one of the ways to implement things, and a lot of companies are choosing to go with that. I just touched on diversity, and I think that is a place to reinforce that. Diversity used to be really a good thing to do. And so 20 years ago, when CEOs would stand up and say, I wanted a more diverse group, I have all those programs, it's a good thing to do, I think we should have more women, more people of color, or whatever ethnicity. Then it became an issue of fight for talent, the war for talent. Obviously, I can't ignore half of the world out there, so it's a really important thing to do. But it still wasn't sort of a great central mission for a company. Today, science actually has proven that diversity is critical to becoming better, to do very simply, and to be more creative. And it started with behavioral economics. Daniel Kahneman wrote about it, for example. He got a Nobel Prize partly for that. And then today, actually, neurology can tell you. And you can see actually what happens to people's brains when they're in diverse group versus not. You can see what happens when a jury is made out of black and white people as opposed to all white and all black. And the reason jury is a great example because everybody has to say something in a jury. You can't just sit there and say nothing. At the end, there has to be a consensus one way or the other. And in many studies, actually, it has been shown that juries that were made of diverse groups came together to better discussion and a better outcome. Because people didn't assume that you immediately agree with me. People really thought about how to convince people. People start thinking about diversity, incorporating that into the way they think in a different way. It's not an automatic. We all have a automatic bias. It's if you have a brain, you have one. It's sort of biologically, it's so you could defend yourself. You sort of react to things that are different. But if you're aware of that and you sort of make it psychologically safe for everybody, let me use a room, for example, to be part of it, it's amazing what you can get out of people who feel comfortable actually expressing themselves if they're different. And so the job of people like the people in the room, CEOs and people in managing resource and projects, is to bring those diverse people together. And it's amazing the amount of creativity that comes out. Think of yourselves in those positions. And by the way, it's not just the obvious diversity. It's people from different backgrounds, people who are single parents, people who have aging parents, whatever. Diversity is, I think, a very important component of creativity, as powerful as those groups you talked about.
Okay. We've been asked to wrap up the session. We've come to the close. But one fun question from the crowd, and I'm daring to ask you this, and I know you don't want to talk about Trump. You don't want to talk about politics, but this question is from the floor. Someone has asked, when is your turn to become the Prime Minister of Israel? Could that person stand up?
I thank you for the thought.
You can choose to answer it or not.
It's not a very charitable thought if you think about being Prime Minister of Israel. It's not the easiest job in the world. I think geopolitics are complicated these days in every part of the world. Israel is part of it. I don't have to go into the details of that, or not only within Israel, and Prime Minister of Israel has his own challenges, but the neighborhood that Israel is in. There are a great many changes that are going on in the United States, yes, and we see them all the time, but in China recently, in India, I just heard Modi talking in a conference, and of course in Europe. Europe was back as of a month ago, and as of last weekend, we don't really know how Italy will contribute to that. And let me add one point about that. Geopolitics is actually something that in today's world is really important thing for CEOs to think about, because almost wherever you are or whatever business you're going to be in, you're probably going to have a global audience, you're probably going to have a global set of customers, and for sure you'll have a global set of competitors. And so incorporating that, this expert generalist thing that I was talking about before, is extremely useful and quite fascinating too.
Okay. You know you didn't really answer the question, right?
I thought I kind of did.
But she spoke like a true politician. She kind of waved around it. Okay. All right, thank you so much for talking to me. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And good luck, everybody.